This morning before you, we have zoning ordinance and zoning map amendments. These are coming out of some of the recommendations and strategies out of our comprehensive plan that was adopted last August. And so we've got a variety of those to go over. Our consultant, Confluence, Chris Shires, is here to help. He helped us with some solar and wind updates, so I'm going to turn it over to him and let him go through those updates. So, and then I'll go over the rest of them. So,
both got it. Okay, board, it's great to be back in front of you again. Chris Shires with Confluence. So talking about updates to your renewable energy chapter, really talking about all things wind and solar energy related. What's a little bit new to us all in Iowa is this utility scale solar or solar farms, but it is something emerging, and I think it's a good thing that Polk County's staying on top of it. So I want to give us just a little bit of a background, since we may not all be familiar with what is utility scale solar. And we have some specific definitions in the code, but in essence, it's a solar farm, a solar array, a set of solar panels intended to provide power to the electrical grid versus use on site. So utility scale does not include when you're putting it on your house or your business or frankly a county facility. This is when it's really intended to provide power to the grid in general, that it's its primary use on site. And that's when we tend to see them being 100, 200, 1,000 acre type facilities. Oh, don't click too far there. One, okay. So this is all on the photovoltaic type system, so they're not necessarily solar collectors, solar reflectors, kind of that older technology we used to think of, heating water or sending hot sun rays onto a block to heat that to generate. This is that photoelectric system where we're directly converting it to a DC current. There are a lot of advantages to this. We're not producing waste, there's no emissions, there's no discharge. These do have a decent life cycle. And what we think of today is these new systems will have a 25 to 40-year lifespan. So we do want to think what happens to that solar field, that solar farm when it's done. So most of the time when we're developing regulations at a county or city level, we want to have some kind of a plan, we call it a decommissioning plan, in place to make sure that that solar field is taken down, disassembled, and ideally recycled and the site put back to use if it's not going to continue as a solar farm. It's something that's also emerging even with wind turbines to make sure if that wind farm is going away, that those facilities, those towers and structures are all removed. What is very typical and what we've proposed in your code is that you're getting a conditional use permit from your zoning board of adjustment, going through a public hearing process and meeting a certain set of criteria to make sure it's appropriate. Both, is it in the right zoning district? Do we have the right setbacks, buffers from sensitive properties, and then of course that reclamation plan. Setbacks are kind of a difficult one when we think of for utility scale solar. Wind turbines, we tend to think of the taller the wind turbine tower structure itself, the farther we want it away from any exterior property lines or from any homes that may be out in the area because of some of the impacts. Solar panels, you know, they're only 10, maybe 12 feet off the ground. They're shorter in scale, but they could have a bit of an impact. But as we increase that setback, we kind of increase the amount of land area one farm might need. And the other big thing is we don't look at internal property lines. And so if there's a couple of different property owners of this solar farm, we're not looking to put setbacks between them. We're really looking to put setbacks from non-participating property owners, properties that are adjacent to it, and from our street right-of-way, our road right-of-ways. The other component, and this is something very important to address in this code, is a newer thing that's emerging is battery storage facilities. And again, this is not for, say, somebody who has a Tesla battery at their house or as a business that has a battery backup. This is, again, at a utility scale where a solar farm or even a utility company installs a bank of batteries to supply the grid in general, not for a specific project. And there's some additional setbacks kind of necessary or desirable for these, and they're generally a lithium-ion type technology. Again, what's typically in an electric car. There are several of these in Iowa today. This is an example of one just outside the city of Knoxville. And it's these kind of little colo units, these little individual container units. And so things we look at is they do generate a little bit of noise. Although rare, a fire could happen in an individual unit. They're very expensive, so anybody who owns one well monitors it. So we do want to make sure they have a decent setback from any existing facilities or properties. Okay, so with that, that's kind of just the background of some new things that have really been emerging. I want to hit the highlights of that new renewable energy regulation. And this is where we're taking your existing solar and wind regulations, updating them and putting them in one consistent, cohesive chapter. In this case, at the end of the zoning ordinance in Article 24, we have our definitions to define all these types of facilities. When is it considered utility scale, and when is it more consumer scale or residential? The approval process, and then some basic design standards. Really trying to balance that. We need some regulations to manage and control, but we also don't want to necessarily prohibit or make it too difficult. So the definitions are probably one of the more key spots, because we're trying to take a lot of technical jargon from the industry so it's consistent, yet trying to then define it for any individual user trying to use this code. And so in general, those solar panels, we call them solar energy conversion systems, whereas wind, we call it a wind energy conversion system. So again, photovoltaic panels or wind turbines as we kind of think about them. And they can either be at a utility scale, designed primarily to provide power for sale to the grid in general, or accessory, and that's where they're designed to provide power just to their own building. So in the case of where our office is in downtown Des Moines, we have photovoltaic panels up on our roof. They're only intended to provide power for our use, although they are interconnected to the grid following Mid-American Energy standards. And then, of course, that battery energy storage system, which has a fun acronym, BESS. On the zoning side of things, certain types of these uses are not necessarily, as we'd recommend, permitted in all zoning districts, but some things sure. So all those definitions, so accessory wind energy conversion systems up top, those require a conditional use permit in most all zoning districts. In one zoning district, they're not permitted. So conditional C, permit required, N is not permitted, and P is permitted by right. And so accessory wind energy, we tend not to think of those wind turbines as being as successful in a developed area, so we tend to be just a little more prohibitive. There is a lot more impact to living near or having a business near a wind turbine. Then utility scale wind energy conversion, that's your typical wind farm, wind turbine farm. Again, conditional use permit, so you could only potentially do one in our ag zoning district. When we get to solar, and that's all the SECS ones, accessory scale solar, permitted in all zoning districts, come in, follow the rules, get a building permit, you're good to go. Utility scale, a little more impact, restricting those to ag and your 2 industrial districts with a conditional use permit, public notice, development review process. And then those battery energy storage systems, again, very similar to how we're treating the utility scale solar, needing a conditional use permit in the ag district and your 2 industrial districts. That is really consistent on how we're applying these kind of Midwest wise. There are utility operations, industrial operations that have maybe a more intense power need, and sometimes that battery storage system is very efficient and good for maintaining a healthy grid. And in some cases, there's some synergy on having utility scale solar in close proximity to, say, a data farm. All right, and then with this, some of the other requirements, utility scale solar and wind, so wind farms and solar farms do require a decommissioning plan. When the life is aged, how is it removed, who's gonna do it, how's it gonna be done, what happens with the leftover materials, and then there is a bonding requirement. When they're first built, the value of the equipment itself far exceeds any cost to pull it out of the ground and recycle it. And there's even a recyclable value. Metals are worth a significant amount in recycling. But over time, as a facility ages out, you may need a bit of a bond from the owner of the facility to ensure something that the county can hold against them to ensure that the site is reclaimed. And to make sure we always have an adequate bond, there is a 5-year annual review or a 5-year review of the facility, of its current value and cost for decommissioning, reclamation, to make sure that the public is protected. All right, I ran through that kind of quick, but if you have any questions, I do have the ordinance. I can go through anything in greater detail. All right, thank you so much.
All right, one of the other things that has been talked about through the comp plan process and has been in the news is accessory dwelling units, and so we're proposing regulations to add those into our zoning ordinance. A lot of benefit in adding affordable housing, caring for mother-in-law suites and that, and we're proposing to allow them to be added onto the existing home or to be part of an accessory building, not attached to the main living quarters. One is permitted per property is what we're proposing, and they currently haven't been permitted under the zoning ordinance, but what we run into quite a bit is somebody that buys a property, they build a living quarters in a pole building, live in that while they're building their new house on the property, and then they have to remove the living quarters. This would allow them to, to keep those as well. Now they turn them into, offices or, a shop area or a craft area or something. So it helps with that. We've got a lot of inquiries about them. We probably get 2 or 3 a week. Doesn't mean they're all going to do it, but we get a lot of requests asking about it. And it was one of the goals and strategies out of the comprehensive plan, so it's why we're moving forward with it. So as I referenced, 1 per property, permitted in all residential zoning districts. One of the things that we're adding into ours, because we don't want, we want to see how it goes, I guess, before we make this jump, is we're going to require the property owner, the title holder of the property, to live in one of the 2 units, so either the principal structure or the accessory structure. So a landlord situation is if the owner lives on property, we don't want investors running into some of our neighborhoods and building up accessory dwelling units at this point. We'll see how that goes and see how that demand is. So that's the one big piece maybe that's different than ours from some other communities in the metro. But we did model this after other, there are examples of this in other communities. 1,200 square feet being the maximum size of the accessory dwelling unit. That is not part of doesn't include the garage or deck space or porch space that would be attached to it as well. And then they have to comply with all the building code and environmental health requirements, which if it's on septic is going to be, challenging at cost, but we didn't want to prohibit that if someone's willing to go through that. So a couple of examples, I'm using some images that are from different examples just to show what they are and where they are. So they can be attached to the house, they can be in a basement, they can be a garage over apartment addition, they can be an accessory building. With the unincorporated area, we've got a lot of variety of housing types, and I think we'll probably see a lot of different varieties of accessory dwelling units, and we've put some, I guess, parameters in place to try to limit that. So again, referencing, we're not going to allow a standalone stick-built structure or manufactured home or mobile home or camper or tiny home to be used as an accessory dwelling unit. Again, trying to just try to rein in what we want to see. We want it to look compatible with the neighborhood, whether that's in a historic neighborhood of Norwoodville or Sailor Township, or if that's in the rural areas on an acreage development. Some examples here, just some images off of the internet. Again, garage over apartments, pole building homes, and then an accessory dwelling unit in a detached garage are the examples shown on the screen there. That's what we're after. Again, we don't have a minimum size other than within the accessory building. It can't take up more than 50% of the accessory building, so we don't want somebody to build a 24 by 24 garage and then turn the whole thing into an accessory dwelling unit, but the minimum size, we didn't put a minimum size. As long as it meets the building code requirements, we would allow that unit to go in. So that's the accessory dwelling unit stuff. Next up is changes within our ag support businesses. So part of our comp plan is to prioritize and promote retaining existing businesses and allow their expansion. And so we have a use that moved into an ag industrial facility that currently wouldn't be permitted in that district, and we want to allow them to remain, and it makes sense. They're a ag-specific light manufacturing facility, and so by making a change to our ag support section, this would allow that business to expand. Also, so these are small changes throughout the ordinance. Another one is stormwater. Currently, we have a minimum requirement of 10,000 square feet before you have to do stormwater requirements. We're proposing to change that to 5,000 because in the last year and a half since we've had these regulations in place, we've had a good number of projects that come in at 9,900 square feet, purposely trying to not have to do the stormwater, and prioritizing stormwater management and water quality was one of the goals of our comp plan. Seems counterproductive if we're providing a mechanism that allows people to not have to meet that requirement. So proposing that as well. Within our sign regulations, currently we allow electronic message board signs for schools and government buildings, and we're looking to change that to allow all institutional uses, so community centers, churches, to allow them to have it to promote the services that they're providing for the public. So a small change that could have a good impact for the community to let know what services are available if those entities choose to put those signs in. The next big change then would be to the zoning map. So the comp plan recommended future land uses. This is not we're not changing everybody's zoning countywide. We're specifically looking at the areas around the growing cities. We've had a lot of annexations occur since we've made significant changes to the zoning districts around the cities. Within our comp plan, we put that into an urban fringe district. Within our zoning ordinance, that's an ag transition zone. And so from the maps here, so comprehensive plan map, the green around the cities, the green around the gray are those urban fringe areas. And then as we go to the zoning map on the next slide, sorry for their size, but wanted to show the whole effect. So current map, we've got some yellows and browns and oranges next to the light green. In the proposed changes, we're making most all of that area light green to make it ag transition, both to the biggest areas are to the northeast of Ankeny, to the east of Altoona, and the east of Pleasant Hill, where we're making those changes. So we don't see any negative effects from property owners. I don't believe we're not taking away any rights. There's some residential zone districts that aren't going to be allowed to be developed unless they're annexed into Ankeny or Altoona or Pleasant Hill today. The intent in 2006 with the last comp plan was to edge match and allow some of that development to work across the lines if development could get started. And as the growth has happened, it's kind of created some inconsistencies with some of those districts. So those are the changes that we're proposing. All the other properties countywide in the unincorporated area are not being changed. So there's nothing hidden in here that's taking something and making it residential that was ag or ag transition today, where it's specifically tied to that urban fringe component. So those are the proposed changes that we have coming. The public hearing is scheduled for July 11th. Zoning Commission, we had a work session with them in March. We had a public hearing in May, and then we had a continued public hearing just last Monday, and they recommended approval of these changes. We had some conversation on the accessory dwelling units, which is why we continued the hearing in May and brought it back to them just earlier this week.
So did you have a philosophical change personally about the electronic signs?
So on for the institutional uses, so part of it came up with, I'll give you the specific example. So we've got Grandview Christian School that went into an old Sadell School District school that had a message board sign. So they have a message board sign, they started using it. And so we've been wrestling with that. So it was existing, it was legal, conforming. Then somebody else moves into the building that's a private school that under our current regulations wouldn't be allowed to use it. And then we get, we've had a number of requests from churches and other organizations that.
I remember the one, Brett, that I think you and I talked about a number of years ago out in 4 Mile Township, the guy that owns the truck repair place over here, is it Bascom? The church that.
Yeah, so this is all we're doing is open this up for institutional uses.
So they still wouldn't be able to do
wouldn't, yeah.
electronic messaging like services or this?
No, it's this specific, community service is the idea behind these changes.
Okay.
So it is only to allow for community centers, churches, other institutional uses that are generally providing services to the community to advertise, AA meetings, or they've got Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts meeting, it's to promote the community is the idea behind
Right.
it, so.
Right. Okay.
But they're just message boards, they're not video boards.
Right, there's still the specific, it can have one message on it, it can't change, it can change once every 24 hours, all of that. Yeah, not the video boards. There'll be video boards, but they can't change and flash.
Just curious about something, Chris, and as you know, I'm serving on the Pleasant Hill Comprehensive Land Use Plan Committee also. I'm going to be gone for their next meeting, but just philosophically, when you look at density in comprehensive land use plans and the higher density zoning areas, it would seem to me, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but it would seem to me that it wouldn't make a lot of sense for a local jurisdiction to encourage a significant increase or even more than they already have of the higher density. I'm talking about multifamily housing. And the reason I say that is because, we all know that those type of multifamily high density developments require much more in public service needs, public safety, transportation infrastructure, public transportation, all those types of things. And as you know, with the legislative rollback on what they pay for property taxes, just don't pay the bills anymore, or even come close. When they were taxed at a commercial rate, it actually covered the cost, most of it anyway, for jurisdictions. So how do you address that just long-term with communities when you do their comp plans?
Yeah, that's a great question and great comment, and I'm sorry, this is like the third steering committee you have to sit with me on, so thanks for volunteering.
It's all right.
So in the case of Pleasant Hill, that's specifically a topic of discussion and analysis. They do want to promote housing at all different sizes and types and typologies, all different price points, but they also want to do the financial analysis based on the tax impact, so they know what they're up against.
Right.
Historically, because back to when we had apartments taxed at a commercial rate, we always thought, it's only a really expensive single-family house that kind of pays, covers its own costs. But apartments and townhomes are great. Well, now with some of the changes, that's kind of getting a little bit watered down. So there's still that demand and need, obviously, for dwelling units of all types. But I think it's important for communities, and in the case, we'll wrestle with Pleasant Hill on what's that financial impact so they know what their investment is. And they know, are certain things going to be a long-term subsidy? Do certain things kind of cover their costs? And that'll be one of our required analysis.
And I know we're trying to edge match anyway. I know Polk County, we've always done a good job at that, communicating with the other jurisdictions about what their plans are with their comprehensive land use plans. But I was just curious what your thoughts were. You'd have to have a total physical analysis to try to determine where you wanted to or not want to zone for high density. I would assume just from a budgeting standpoint.
Yeah, and that in the case of this, the plan for Polk or for Pleasant Hill that you discussed, that's part of the process, and then definitely just from the basics of where can we properly provide the infrastructure, where do we have adequate services, the other thing is making sure that we have, good pedestrian connections, that we're really near activity centers, that we're not trying to throw a lot of high-density housing in an area with no services too.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so good question. We're going to try to wrestle with that one.
Okay. Like I said, I won't be there, but I think you know my position on it, so.
There's plenty of more meetings coming.
I know.
We still have a
Believe me,
chance.
I know, yeah. Anybody else, questions for him today?
Max,
Max?
maximum
Okay.
size. Yeah, there's no minimum size. The minimum size would,
Minimum size, but you're not gonna allow for tiny houses or
correct.
some of these, modular structures.
Yeah, so the idea is we think that on the affordability side, that use Norwoodville as an example, a neighborhood that we're getting connected to sanitary sewer that has maybe 1,000 square foot house today and either an accessory building, or they could build a relatively small size accessory building and put in an efficiency apartment inside that space at what we view as a pretty, reasonable cost and an entry point. The challenge to a lot of the ADUs is, in the unincorporated areas, if you've got to put in an entire new septic system, whether you're building a standalone unit or, whatever that looks like, you're gonna have to upsize your septic system or put in a new one, and that's gonna limit a lot of our smaller properties from even being able to put one in. We've wrestled with, do we only allow them on properties served by sewer? And then we run into these where we've got larger properties that already put in a septic system for a pole building because they've got a bathroom in it. And so we're trying to, I guess, put the pieces in where they fit at the moment, and as we see the need grow, we can readdress it or look at what those options are. But we,
And I guess what your next comment would be helpful if you tell me what Des Moines is doing on the size of the structures.
yeah, so I can't rattle off Des Moines' regulations right at the moment, but I know maybe a year ago they adopted their accessory dwelling units. I know Home Inc. did a kind of a pilot project model one and built one that I've looked at their information on. But yeah, there's most of the communities now within the metro have adopted or are looking at adopting ADU standards, and they all kind of vary a little bit. But the thing that we found in researching it is some areas of the country have lots of them. For whatever reason, in the cities that have adopted them in the Midwest, the counties that have adopted them, you're not getting a whole bunch of them. And there's some what we found out is there's some banking institution issues. They won't provide residential lending under the normal lending measures, and there's some barriers there that we see is why we're not seeing more of them here.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, everybody.